The first dog showed up just after sunrise. Harold Dunn, the longtime groundskeeper at Edgewood Police Cemetery, was halfway through his morning routine hosing down the flagpole steps and trimming weeds near the perimeter when he noticed a lone German shepherd sitting near the cemetery's front gate. The dog wasn't moving, wasn't panting, and wasn't wagging its tail. It simply sat still, posture perfect, eyes fixed straight ahead like it was waiting for someone. Harold, who'd worked around dogs most of his life, recognized the animal's trained discipline. You don't sit like that unless someone taught you, he muttered, watching it carefully. It wore no collar, no leash dragged behind it. But the way it sat straight-backed, alert told him this wasn't just a stray. He kept working, assuming someone nearby would soon call out. But no one did. An hour later, there were 3 more dogs. Another German shepherd, a sleek Belgian, Malinois, and a dark chocolate lab, all sat in a triangle near the first, none barking, none playing, just watching. Their focus was unsettling, not on Harold, not on one another, but toward the same small hill in the middle of the cemetery. That hill housed one of the newest graves. A fresh patch of soil rested beneath a simple granite headstone that read, K9, Ranger Loyal to the End, E.O. April 9th. Harold started to get uneasy. He'd buried Ranger just 5 days earlier. He remembered how quiet the ceremony had been. No trumpets, no folded flags. Just Officer Elena Cruz and 2 uniformed colleagues. She hadn't wanted a crowd. She said Ranger didn't like noise. By noon, there were 11 dogs. They'd come from different directions. A Doberman limped in from the east. A golden retriever, lean and scarred, padded in from the back fence. A bloodhound arrived with a twig tangled in his ears, exhausted but determined. All took a position around the grave, forming a wide half-circle facing the hill. Not one dog lay down. Not one broke formation. Harold called the precinct. Edgewood PD, Officer Lang speaking. Yeah, Harold said, rubbing the back of his neck. I think you guys might want to come down here. You've got visitors. Visitors? Dogs? Harold said. About a dozen. All kinds. They're just here, watching the new grave. And I don't know how, but I think they're here for Ranger. The line was silent for a moment. Then Officer Lang quietly replied, We'll be there in 5. By the time officers arrived, the count had risen to 17. Most were police breeds, some younger, still full of twitchy energy that barely held in check. Others older, with graying muzzles and tired hips, standing stubbornly in place despite the spring wind. None had handlers nearby. No one could explain it. SGT Davis, who ran the department's K9 division, stood frozen next to Officer Cruz. She hadn't spoken since she arrived. Her eyes locked on the dogs, scanning every face. Her lips trembled. That one, she finally whispered, pointing. That's Zeke. He trained with Ranger 3 years ago. And that one, Scout. He was in our training unit in 2019. She kept listing names. Names of dogs that weren't supposed to be here. Names of dogs who lived miles away. Some even retired from duty. By dusk, 32 dogs were gathered. The parking lot filled with patrol cars. Officers watched from the hilltop. Local news cameras rolled, and still none of the dogs moved. They didn't bark. They didn't sniff around. They didn't break formation. They just sat in reverent stillness, eyes locked on Ranger's grave, like they knew exactly who was buried there. No one could explain how they knew, but everyone felt it in their bones. This was no accident. This was a vigil, a ceremony beyond human understanding. And it had only just begun. Officer Elena Cruz had been avoiding that grave ever since the funeral. She hadn't wanted a ceremony. No speeches, no rifles, no badges on polished dress blues. She didn't think she could stand. there and let them say goodbye to Ranger like he was just another officer. He wasn't. He was her partner, her shield, her reason for surviving too many calls that went sideways. So when SGT Davis called her that afternoon and said, "You need to come to the cemetery. Something's happening," she assumed it was vandalism or maybe a freak storm, knocking over headstones. But when she turned the corner into the cemetery drive and saw the crowd of dogs lining the hill, her knees buckled. "Are they?" she asked, stepping out of her car. "They've been here all day," Davis said softly, his usual edge dulled by the strangeness of the scene. "They just keep coming." She walked slowly, eyes sweeping the field. She recognized some immediately. Zeke, the big Malinois that used to chase Ranger around the obstacle course like a hyper younger brother. Scout, the awkward Doberman who always barked at thunder and tried to hide behind Ranger's legs. There were others, two faces from training sessions, joint deployments, and photo day lineups. Some she'd seen once. Others she had trusted with her life. And now they were all here. As Elena reached the edge of Ranger's grave, the air shifted. Every dog lifted its head. Their eyes followed her. She felt it deep in her chest, a weight like grief, but also something older, something she couldn't name. She knelt down and placed her hand on the headstone. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. "You never liked the spotlight." One of the dogs, a graying retriever, stood and walked toward her. It stopped just short of touching distance and sat, then slowly looked up at the headstone. The others followed, as if obeying an invisible command, and then it began. A low, harmonic howl rose from somewhere in the group. One dog started, then another. The sound built slowly, layered and strange. It wasn't chaotic barking. It was deep, drawn out, haunting, like mourning in unison. Like they were all singing the same note of loss. Officers nearby stopped talking. Some lowered their phones. A few instinctively removed their hats. It wasn't just sad, it was holy. The sound went on for nearly 2 minutes. Elena couldn't move. Her chest heaved as she fought tears. Not since the day Ranger was wounded had she felt this kind of ache. But even then, she'd been too busy trying to keep him alive to let herself break. Now, surrounded by dogs who had come without instruction, who had gathered as if summoned by memory alone, she felt the truth settle into her bones. They weren't here by chance. And Ranger hadn't really left them. When the howling faded, silence took its place. The dogs lowered their heads. Some lay down. A few turned to face outward, like sentries guarding the grave. Elena finally stood, brushing dirt off her pants. She turned to Davis, who hadn't moved either. "This doesn't make sense," he said, rubbing his jaw. "We didn't call them. No one did." She nodded slowly, her voice low and steady. "They came anyway." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She stared at her ceiling in the dark, thinking about the way the dogs had known. Not just where to go, but why. She tried to remember if Ranger had left anything behind. Any sign. Any clue. And then something strange struck her. She remembered placing a small bouquet at Ranger's grave the day he was buried. She remembered laying a tug toy beside it, the one he never went anywhere without. But when she reached to the side table that night and pulled out the second copy of that toy, the one she had saved as a keepsake, her heart stopped. It was gone. By morning, the number had grown. 43 dogs now surrounded Ranger's grave. Some lay in the grass. Some stood on alert. A few paced slowly, their eyes scanning the horizon as if waiting for something or someone else to arrive. They showed no signs of aggression, no signs of panic. They weren't tethered. They weren't guided. They simply came. Veterinarians from the county offered to assist. They checked for identification chips. Most dogs had them active-duty K9s, several retired, but not all. No two dogs had come from the same exact point. Some had crossed rivers. Others had wandered through busy intersections. One Labrador was discovered to have come from a town over 60 miles away. The strange part wasn't just the distances they traveled, it was how they got there unharmed. They had to have crossed highways. Officer Lang muttered, scanning GPS logs. But none of the departments reported any accidents. No one saw a thing. A video soon surfaced. A traffic cam showed a K9 from another precinct stepping up to a crosswalk. He paused, waited, and only when the light changed did he begin walking. Alone, confident, like he'd done it 1,000 times. "This isn't just instinct," said Dr. Nancy Eldridge, a canine behaviorist brought in from the university. "This is intention, purpose." By late afternoon, the press had arrived in full. News vans lined the far end of the cemetery. Reporters whispered behind cameras, too cautious to interrupt the animals holding vigil. Drone footage showed the eerie formation from above a near-perfect circle around the grave, with a single opening facing the cemetery's gate. But no matter how many cameras recorded or experts commented, the same question kept rising. How did they know? Elena Cruz sat in her unmarked car, staring through the windshield at the hill. She hadn't left the cemetery grounds since the previous night. She was exhausted, emotionally wrecked. But she also couldn't tear herself away. Something told her this wasn't over. SGT. Davis opened the passenger door and slid into the seat beside her. "They've ID'd most of the dogs," he said. 27 are active K9s. Another 10 are retired. 5 have no records at all. Strays, maybe. Elena nodded, rubbing her hands together. "Did any handlers come forward?" "Some. Most of them didn't even know their dogs were missing until we called. One guy swears his dog was locked in the kennel last night. No broken latch, no signs of escape." A silence stretched between them. Then Elena said what had been burning at the back of her throat all day. "I think they felt it." Davis glanced at her. "Felt what?" "When Ranger died," she said. "I think, somehow, they felt it, like a signal, like a call." Davis scoffed lightly, but not mockingly. "I don't even know how to argue with that." That night, something even stranger happened. Around 2:19 a.m., the cemetery's motion sensors were triggered. A groundskeeper on night shift walked out to check, assuming it was a raccoon. But what he found instead made his blood run cold. Every single dog had risen. Not one barked. Not one moved from the circle. They had all simply stood together staring at the grave dot somehow. They had all synchronized. No whistle. No order. Just stillness and silence and unity. The time was logged and confirmed. Later, 2:19 a.m. It meant little to anyone except Officer Cruz. That was the exact time on the incident report from Ranger's last mission. The exact minute his vitals had flatlined in the vet's operating room. He died at 2:19 a.m. And now, all of these dogs, they stood at attention at the same time. Like soldiers honoring a fallen commander. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But deep down, something inside her had already accepted the truth. This wasn't a coincidence. And Ranger's story was not finished yet. Asterisk, the cemetery gates stayed open for 3 straight days. Officers, dog handlers, and civilians visited in waves, some bringing flowers, others offering leashes, treats, or toys. But none of the K9s moved. The formation stayed rigid. A silent circle, unbroken, surrounding Ranger's grave like it was sacred ground. Word spread across departments. Retired handlers arrived in tears. One woman, who hadn't seen her partner, dog in 4 years, spotted him among the pack. "Harvey?" she whispered. The old bloodhound lifted his eyes at the sound of her voice, ears twitching. But he didn't move. not even when she stepped forward with open arms. His gaze returned to the grave as if his duty wasn't finished. And then came the collar dot. Around noon on the third day, a courier arrived. He looked out of place, young, jeans torn, helmet still strapped under his chin. He asked for Officer Cruz. "Delivery for you," he said, holding out a sealed brown envelope. It was in a locker at the K9 training compound. Said it was marked urgent. Had your name on it. Elena took the envelope slowly. "Who left it?" The courier shrugged. "Didn't say?" Inside was a note, handwritten in Ranger's file folder. It simply read, "If anything happens to me, give this to Elena." Beneath it was a small Ziploc bag containing something she hadn't seen in months, a worn leather collar. Old, faded, and cracked around the holes. It was Ranger's training collar, not his duty one. This was the first collar he'd ever worn. She recognized the scratch on the buckle from the day he'd yanked free and bolted after a runaway suspect across the agility course. That was back when they were still learning each other. Back before they trusted each other completely. She turned the collar over. A G, tiny tracker was stitched into the lining. Davis spotted it immediately. "That's not department issue." Elena nodded, heart pounding. "No, it's not. A tech team confirmed it. The device was military grade. GPS enabled but encrypted. When decrypted, it revealed a strange log coordinates, movement patterns, and one disturbing detail. Ranger's location pinged twice the night he died. Once at the hospital where he'd been taken, and once again 2 hours after his time of death. The second ping came from a wooded area 4 miles outside city limits. "That's not possible," Davis said, frowning. "He never left the hospital after surgery. He was declared dead on the table and buried 2 days later," Elena added. They stared at the second location silently. A place called Tiller's Grove. Abandoned property. No listed owners. Known for illegal hunting and dumping grounds years ago. Now just trees, decay, and silence. Later that evening, Elena made a decision. She called in 2 trusted K9 officers, loaded her gear, and drove out to the coordinates. The dogs in the cemetery still hadn't moved. As she backed out, she looked into her rearview mirror. Scout, the clumsy Doberman, watched her go, with a glint of something like understanding in his eyes. When they arrived at Tiller's Grove, the place was darker than it should have been. The canopy was thick. Her flashlight caught tangled underbrush, broken fences, and the remnants of an old hunting shack. Something had been here recently. Tracks, mud prints, dog-sized. "Look at this," one officer whispered, shining his light at a half-covered opening in the ground. It was a trapdoor. Rusted but still functional. Beneath it lay a narrow stairway, leading into what looked like an old storm shelter. Elena took the lead, stepping slowly into the darkness. The air smelled musty like rot and chemicals. They reached the bottom. What they saw stopped them cold. The walls were lined with photos, dozens of them. Every one of the different K9, some in training, some mid-jump, others standing beside their handlers, eyes gleaming with pride. There were maps, too, names, checklists. And in the center of the room, a single metal table. On it, a tag, Ranger. The tag glinted under the beam of Elena's flashlight. She stared at it without moving, as if afraid it might vanish if she blinked. The table beneath it was cold steel, scratched and worn. Around the edges were faded brown stains, old blood. Maybe. Claw marks trailed down the legs. It wasn't just a storage room. It was a testing site. "Someone did something down here," she muttered, her voice tight. This wasn't just a kennel. The other officers moved carefully, scanning. The walls, the photos weren't decorative, they were methodical. Each image was labeled by date, location, and code name. Some of the dogs were familiar K9s currently at the cemetery. Others were unknown. There was a stack of papers on a side shelf, half burned but still legible. Elena sifted through them, pulling out fragments. Subject 7 responded to auditory. Recall at 2.4 miles. Primary success. Unassisted convergence. No human directive. Phase 3 requires imprinting on target C, subject R9. R9, Davis whispered, pointing to the tag on the table. That's Ranger. Elena felt her stomach twist. Imprinting? Convergence? These aren't standard training terms, one of the officers said. This is something else. They were experimenting. Someone had been tracking K9 south, testing. Behavior beyond normal obedience. Studying how far their loyalty could stretch, how deep their memory ran, how strong their bond could become when pushed to unnatural limits. And Ranger, he wasn't just a participant. He was the centerpiece dot in a hidden drawer beneath the table. They found a thumb drive dot back at the precinct. Elena and the tech team decrypted the files. The folder name sent a chill through the room. Ghost signal. Inside were dozens of videos, grainy. Infrared recordings. Dogs navigating obstacles alone in the dark. Dogs responding to ultrasonic tones. Dogs returning to the same place. Night after night, even after death had been confirmed. The final video was labeled R9 Final. The footage began with Ranger strapped to a gurney, unconscious but stable. A man's voice narrated calmly, dispassionately. Phase 3 memory encoding complete. Neural mapping successful. Subject R9 has responded to post-operative cues 36 hours after final conditioning. In the corner, a monitor showed brainwave patterns spiking in tandem with a low pulsing frequency. The sound was barely audible, more felt than heard. Then something unthinkable happened. The video timestamp matched the night Ranger had died. But in the footage, after the medical team declared time of death, Ranger's paw twitched. Then, his head moved. Then his eyes opened. No way. Someone muttered behind Elena. She couldn't take her eyes off the screen dot in the footage. The room was cleared. Ranger remained alone. 2 hours later, at exactly 2:19 a.m., he stood up, unsteady, sluggish, but alive. He stepped off the gurney and walked out of frame. The video ended there. Elena's hands trembled as she pulled the drive out. Her mind raced. The caller, the second GPS ping, the dogs gathering, the howl, the trapdoor, all of it pieces of something larger. Ranger wasn't just trained, she whispered. He was altered. Davis leaned forward. But why? And why now? Elena looked toward the precinct windows. Out in the distance, the cemetery lights glowed under a cloudy sky. The dogs were still there, still holding vigil. And somewhere among them were dogs who had been part of this program. Some knew, some remembered. But one thing was clear. Whatever was done to Ranger hadn't stayed buried. And those who did this, they were still out there. Asterisk for the first time since Ranger's funeral. The dogs began to move dot. It happened just after dawn. One by one, they stood, stretched slowly, and began walking down the cemetery hill, not chaotically, not hurried, but in a deliberate line. They didn't scatter or break formation. They moved like a unit, like soldiers, called to a silent roll call. Elena, watching from her parked cruiser across the street, stepped out. They're leaving, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Davis stood beside her. Where are they going? Elena didn't answer. She was already grabbing her jacket. She got into her car, switched on the dash cam, and followed. Other officers joined. One by one, police cruisers tailed the line of dogs as they marched through town, past the park, across the old bridge. That led to the city's industrial zone. Not a single bark, not a single break in rhythm. The lead dog, a grizzled German shepherd with a scar across his left eye, guided the procession. Elena remembered him from years ago. His name was Titan Retired. After saving his handler during a hostage standoff, he had vanished from his foster home 2 days before the vigil began. The dogs crossed into a part of town no one went without backup, an old rail yard, long abandoned and rumored to be used by smugglers and worse. When the lead dog stopped in front of a rusted-out warehouse, the others fanned out, forming a perimeter. Elena parked, heart hammering in her chest. "What is this?" Davis murmured beside her. She didn't answer. She already knew. They had found whoever was behind Ghost Signal. The building's windows were boarded up, the doors sealed with old chains. But the dogs weren't interested in the front. Titan padded to the rear wall and pawed at a rusted service hatch. Behind it was a keypad modern, untouched by time. "Tech," Elena called over the radio. "We've got a concealed entry. Bring a hacking kit." 20 minutes later, the door hissed open. Inside was darkness, stale air, and something else, something sharp and sterile. The smell of antiseptic and metal. The walls were lined with cages, some empty, some not. 2 dogs lay still inside locked compartments, eyes open but lifeless. A low whimper echoed from deeper in the room. "Clear the building," Davis ordered. "Secure every room. No one in or out." Elena followed the faint sound down a corridor and into a large chamber where monitors still blinked with active code. Someone had been here recently. And then she saw him. A man early 60s, white lab coat, gray hair slicked back, standing by a table filled with syringes and vials. His hands were raised. "I didn't expect them to remember," he said calmly, his voice echoing. Elena raised her weapon. "Who are you?" He smiled. "Dr. Morgan. I designed the signal." Behind him, more cages lined the wall. Some held small devices, others strange helmets with coils wrapped around the inside. "You used them," she said through clenched teeth. "You hijacked their minds." "No," Morgan said quietly. "I unlocked their memories." He turned a monitor toward her. It showed a neural map, the same she'd seen on the thumb drive. "You don't understand. They never forget. Not a face, not a smell, not pain. We just help them hold on to it longer, stronger." Davis stepped into the room, weapon drawn. "They came here on their own," he said. "They knew what you did." Morgan nodded, oddly. "At peace, that's the proof. Memory convergence. Phase 4. Then he looked out the window. The dogs were circling the warehouse. "They remember everything?" Morgan said softly. "And now they've come to make sure the world remembers." 2. Outside the warehouse, the circle of K9 South grew tighter. They didn't bark. They didn't growl. They simply waited, watching the building like a jury waiting for the verdict. Some officers were visibly shaken. These dogs had traveled miles, broken, through locked gates, crossed rivers not for vengeance, for justice. Inside, Dr. Morgan sat cuffed to a steel chair. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes studied every officer in the room. Elena paced slowly, unable to shake the heaviness in her chest. "Start talking," she said. "All of it," Morgan exhaled. 10 years ago, I was hired by a private military contractor, Cerberus Solutions. We were developing cognitive enhancement for military working dogs, not just scent training or obedience. We wanted memory extension, pattern recognition beyond normal capacity, psychological imprinting. He gestured toward one of the monitors, which now displayed a photo of Ranger. R9 was our most successful subject. Highest retention rate, deepest loyalty imprint. We discovered that certain K9 South, when bonded with their handler at the right moment, developed relational memory convergence, a kind of emotional GPS. You could separate them for months, Years, and they'd still find each other. You turned them into homing beacons, Davis muttered. No, Morgan said. We turned them into protectors who could think beyond the leash. Elena stepped closer. And when the government shut the project down, you kept going. Morgan tilted his head. Would you have stopped? He said it without hesitation. We didn't create monsters. We revealed what was already inside them. Loyalty so deep, it rewrote instinct. You buried Ranger's body, but the part of him that remembered? That wasn't in his brain. It was in all of them. Elena's hand tightened into a fist. You used him. You used them all. Morgan smiled slightly. No, they came back. That was the point. The test wasn't the training. It was whether the others would hear the signal and respond. A call crackled through the radio. Ma'am, you might want to see this. We found a hatch beneath the generator. Elena and Davis moved fast, accompanied by 2 officers and a K9 unit. The hatch opened to a second-level underground lower than the lab, colder. It smelled like mildew and old wires. They found rows of file cabinets, boxes of labeled tags, photos of dogs, brain scans, diagrams, and at the far end of the room, a sealed chamber. Elena unlatched the door and stepped inside. It wasn't a lab. It was a memorial. Dozens of tags lined the wall, some dusty, some polished. And in the center, on a stone platform, sat a preserved replica of Ranger's first collar, the one she just recovered. But this one was soaked in something dark, burnt around the edges. It was the original. Her knees nearly buckled. This is where they brought him after the surgery, she said. Davis scanned the room. They didn't bury him right away, Elena nodded. They waited to see what he'd do. And when he left that night, when he triggered that final GPS ping, he came back here. He came back, Davis repeated, the realization settling in, to warn the others. Suddenly, a distant sound rang out above them, a howl long and haunting, the same tone they'd heard 3 nights ago. The same call that brought them all together. They raced back upstairs, outside. The dogs had surrounded the entire compound. And from every road, every alley, more were arriving. They weren't just K9 South now. Civilians had reported seeing pets gone missing. Strays emerged from shadows. The numbers doubled, then tripled. All of them converging here, all of them answering the same echo. Morgan watched from the window, eyes wide for the first time. They're not just remembering him, they're becoming him. And as Elena stepped out into the dawn, light, surrounded by dogs from every past and every memory, she understood. Ranger's death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something no one could control. By mid-morning, the warehouse was surrounded, not by SWAT, not by protesters, but by hundreds of dogs trained K9 South, strays, retired service animals, even family pets that had broken free from backyards. They all stood, forming a quiet perimeter around the old structure, their bodies still, their eyes fixed. Some officers watched in awe. Others tightened their grips on their radios, not sure if they were witnessing a miracle or the beginning of something terrifying. Elena stepped forward, past the cordon. Titan, the old shepherd who had led the march, met her. Eyes. He didn't move until she whispered, "Show me." He turned without hesitation and walked toward the western corner of the building, where the concrete was cracked and overgrown. Several other dogs joined him, sniffing, pawing at a square patch of dirt. It looked ordinary, just a patch of earth. But Elena dropped to her knees and brushed it back with her hands. A thin layer of soil gave way to something harder. A TRAPDOOR. Davis arrived with a crowbar. Together, they pried it open. Beneath it lay a small, sealed chamber, airtight, insulated. Inside were 3 items: a binder labeled R9, Final Protocol, a flash drive. Scratched, but intact, a voice recorder. Elena turned it over, hands trembling, and pressed play. If you're hearing this, it means Ranger came back. And it means he wasn't alone. The voice was female Dr. Helena Rios. Elena recognized her name from the files. I helped create Ghost Signal, but I didn't know they would keep going after we lost funding. I buried this recording with Ranger's true records because I knew one day someone would come looking. The recording crackled. We didn't just amplify memory. We amplified grief, loyalty, purpose. We never asked what would happen if a dog lost everything, but remembered all of it. Ranger didn't die confused. He died knowing. Elena closed her eyes. He had died knowing something was wrong and that someone would have to find the truth. She turned to the binder. Inside were logs confirming everything. Unsanctioned trials, unauthorized implants, a list of dogs who had been flagged for their unusually high memory retention. Most had been quietly retired or released. Many were now outside this very building. What happens when their loyalty doesn't fade? Rios had written in one of the final entries. What happens when they remember more than we do? Elena stood, holding the binder close to her chest. Back inside, Morgan was being loaded into a transport van. As officers secured him, he looked over at the line of dogs still standing watch. They weren't supposed to come together like this, he said, eyes wide. This wasn't part of the design. They're not machines, Elena said firmly. They're family. And family remembers. By evening, news of the event had spread. Videos of the K9s South gathered at the warehouse went viral. People from across the country began posting photos of their own dogs, those who had once served and vanished. Dozens reported their pets returning home days after going missing, only to lie silently by their side for hours, as if waiting for something. Elena filed her final report with one closing note. We may never fully understand what Ghost Signal triggered, but Ranger's legacy wasn't a procedure. It wasn't science. It was loyalty, carried and echoed through every life he touched. That night, she returned to the cemetery. Titan stood by Ranger's grave once more. This time, Elena joined him. She laid the collar down gently, the same one Ranger had worn on his very first day. And for the first time in days, a breeze passed. Through the trees, the dogs began to leave quietly, slowly, peacefully. Their vigil was over. Ranger's mission was complete. And somewhere deep in the stillness, in the heart of every K9 who had answered the call, his memory lived on. The end.